Good morning and welcome to Aroa Biosurgery's presentation at the NWR virtual conference. Aroa Biosurgery is a regenerative medicine company, develops and manufactures medical devices for wound and tissue repair in the United States and internationally. Committed to unlocking regenerative healing for everybody, its products are developed from the company's proprietary Endoform technology platform, a novel extracellular matrix biomaterial derived from ovine or sheep forestomach. Clinically proven with peer-reviewed publications, Aroa's products have been used in more than 4 million procedures to date, with distribution into its key markets of the United States by Appulse and Tela Bio. From the company today, we have CEO and founder Brian Ward and James Agnew, the company's Chief Financial Officer. Guys, I'll hand it over to you, but before I do that, just in terms of any questions that do come through, please do so via the Q&A box down the bottom, and the more the merrier. So guys, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thank you, Simon. I'm just going to rip straight into it. So Simon has shared the presentation there, so let me just technical issue here. Yeah, so as Simon said, we're a soft tissue regeneration company, well established. The company was established 11 years ago. Last year, FY20, we did $22 million in sales, gross margins in excess of 70%, and we're EBITDA positive. We have 5 commercial products in the US. One of the products is established, the other products are very early in the commercialization process. So there's a lot of opportunity ahead of the company. For those products, the total addressable market in the US alone is in excess of $1.5 billion. Already this technology has been used in over 4 million procedures, and most of those have been in the United States. There's a large body of clinical evidence that sits behind this technology, so over 16 peer-reviewed publications, multiple presentations at international conferences. We have regulatory approvals in over 37 countries, and as an organisation, there's over 140 people involved in the organisation. So here in New Zealand, we have our development, manufacturing, quality, regulatory and corporate function. It's about 100 people, and then in the US we have a sales office in San Diego, and then sales representatives spread right across the US. So just in terms of the technology, our platform technology is, as Simon said, an extracellular matrix. So what we do is we isolate a very particular layer of tissue from the forestomach of sheep. This tissue has a very unique structure, and so it's a tissue that has a very open porous structure, which means that cells can migrate into it very quickly. It has a high concentration of signaling molecules, which are known to be important in tissue repair and regeneration. And it's full of vascular vessels. So what that means is that when we process it and purify it, there's a large number of vascular channels that are left in this material, which means that it forms a blood supply very quickly when it's implanted. So what we do is we isolate this very distinct extracellular matrix layer. We then process it in a way that removes all of the cells and cell contents and leaves behind a framework or a scaffold that can be used for tissue regeneration. This is a very special framework that has the structure and the signals that drive this regenerative response. That framework then becomes a building block for a wide range of different devices, and I'll talk briefly about a number of these devices that we manufacture. So our products are typically used in soft tissue reconstruction, and the way to think about this is that different products have different purposes and are used for different purposes in soft tissue reconstruction. So typically, synthetic materials have been used in high volume, relatively less complex cases. Biologics have been reserved for the most complex cases and typically where patients have healing impairment. What we've done is develop a very high quality biologic with all of the properties of the leading biologics, but being able to do it at scale. So these products are much more affordable than they've previously been. And what that does is open up a much wider opportunity to use biologics for medical devices and drive that regenerative healing response. One of the weaknesses with biologics has been that they sometimes aren't durable over time, and they can be weak. So in those uses where our biologic needs to be strong, what we've done is we've added synthetic fibers to our biologic products to reinforce those products and make them durable over time. But importantly, what we've done is we've done that at a very low level so that you don't get the complications that are typical with synthetic materials. So I just want to talk briefly about our product range. So we started with our first product in diabetic ulcers and venous ulcers through a partnership with a multinational called Hollister, based out of Chicago. So they originally bought the rights for this technology in North America, commercialized our first product, and then came back a year later and bought the global rights. We recently bought back those global rights. And so we're now commercializing that product in our own right. It's a relatively small market, so only $78 million. We started in a place that's really simple, and we're now progressing into much larger opportunities and with higher value products and much more complex devices. The second product that we have in the US is a product called Ovatex. This is a product that's a combination of our biologic material and either synthetic or resorbable synthetic fibers. This is used in complex hernia repair. This is a very large opportunity, so in excess of $845 million. This product's been on the market since the middle of 2016, very early in the commercialization process. We've recently launched a product called Ovatex PRS, and more recently, we've just had clearance from the FDA for our Symphony product, which will be launched, a soft launch next year with a full launch in 2022. So just briefly to talk through the products, our Endoform product, there's two versions of that, a natural version and antimicrobial version. As I said previously, used in diabetic and venous ulcers. Typically, this is laid into the bed of these very deep wounds, can be applied between 1 to 3 times a week, and typically applied for up to 12 weeks. So this allows cells to move into this framework, lay down new tissue, and as consecutive layers of this material are added, it allows you to heal the wound from the base right up to the surface over that 12-week period. Typically, these patients have these wounds are very hard to heal. So this provides a way to help heal these difficult to heal wounds. Our Ovatex product typically used in complex hernias. That's expanding now into ventral and other hernias. So this is the product that's a combination of the biologic and synthetic mesh. Typically used where there's been complications with synthetic mesh. So an example of that would be the case here, where this patient's developed a fistula, which is a discharging wound in the skin. And the reason they've developed it is that there's an infected synthetic mesh in the abdominal wall. What the surgeon would do here is cut out a window out of the abdomen of this patient and then patch that window with our Ovatex product. Typically what they do here is they close the skin over the Ovatex graft. In this case, they've left it open because it's quite severely infected. But what that does give you an opportunity to do is to see how this material turns into tissue over time. So you can see at week 1 here, that white implant has become very red, and that's new tissue growing through the graft. At week 4, it's grown right up to the surface, and then at week 8, it's almost closed. So these implants turn into patient tissue over time, and if they are resorbable, then they completely turn into tissue. They're completely replaced by the patient's own tissue. If they have a permanent synthetic fiber in, then the biologic turns into tissue, and a small amount of synthetic remains within the patient. This is our Myriad graft. This is a product that we commercialized at the beginning of this year. It's a multi-layered version of our biologic that's highly perforated and allows cells to migrate into it very rapidly. This is a patient with as you can see, a wound on the foot. It's previously failed with 2 previous treatments. The patient has had a graft here with Myriad at week 0. You can see at week 1 that graft is starting to become very red. That's new tissue growing through the graft. And at week 2, what they've done is they've applied a split thickness graft over the top of the Myriad material. And so what's important here is the rate at which new tissue forms. So that's a very rapid increase in the formation of tissue, and it allows the surgeon to close the wound very quickly. And that's a function of the porosity of the material and the signaling that happens within this material. In addition to that, we've got a really strong pipeline of new products coming through. So while the commercial products are still very early in the commercialization phase, we also have a big investment in development and bringing forward new products. So at the beginning of end of last year, we launched a product called OviTex PRS for breast surgery. We have had our Symphony product cleared. That's a combination of our biologic and molecule called hyaluronic acid. That's for healing in the latter stage of diabetic and venous ulcers, and typically in patients that have very impaired healing. And then we're also combining this biologic material with negative pressure wound therapy to really accelerate the rate of healing in some of these patients. And we have a significant development program in that combination therapy. So what's important in healthcare, as most people will know, is the clinical effectiveness of products. And we're very committed to developing high quality clinical evidence. What I'm presenting here is wound closure rates at 12 weeks in complex wounds. And this data comes from peer-reviewed publications in the clinical and scientific literature. And it compares the Aroa products compared to the leading biologic products in the US. And each of these is a different study. And what you can see here is that the Aroa products typically perform better than all of the competing biologic products. The other thing to take into account here is typically they are significantly less expensive. So you get that benefit of a high performing material at an affordable, accessible price. This is a study that's been run by our US partner for our hernia product. It's called the Bravo study. It's a 91 patient multi-center study running in the US for simple and complex hernia. And so what's important in these patients is that there's a very high rate of recurrence with these hernias. They are typically hernias that are very difficult to heal, and they commonly fail, the repair commonly fails after a period of time. So in the top line, what you can see here is the first 57 patients that have completed 12 months follow-up. And in these patients, there's been 1 recurrence. The second line shows the first 20 patients that have completed 24-month follow-up, and there's 0 recurrence. Now that's a really different result compared to what is typically seen with these patients. Failure rates tend to be between 10 and 30%. The next 3 lines show you the leading synthetic product in the US. So this is a product called Phasix, and you can see there, depending on timing with the follow-up, failure can be between 5 and 23%. The last 2 lines are the leading biologic product in the US, Stratus. And what you can see there is that failure rates for Stratus are typically 22 to 33%. Now, Stratus or the biologic products tend to be used in the more complex cases, so you would expect that the failure rates are high, but there's a very significant difference when you look at the failure rates or the lack of failure with OviTex compared to the failure products with the market leaders in the US. So we expect to have a further readout from the study in this quarter, and that will be the first 50 patients completing 24 months, and we expect this data to hold up. So this is a implant that really is going to change the standard of care for these patients. And we think this is really going to drive significant adoption of this product over the coming 18 to 24 months. Just in terms of our sales channel, so how we sell in the US. So the first thing is that over 95% of our business is in the US. So our commercial activities have been strongly focused on commercializing these products in the US. For our wound business and our soft tissue reconstruction business, we sell through a joint venture called Appulse. So this is a 50-50 joint venture between Aroa and a company called Hydrofera. Hydrofera and Aroa joined together when Hollister divested their wound care division. Both companies bought back their assets, and then we joined together to retain the US-based sales team. So this sales team predominantly calls on outpatient wound centers, and they are predominantly calling on podiatrists, WOCNs, which are wound and ostomy nurses, and physicians. For our hernia and breast business, we've partnered this to a company called Tela Bio. Tela Bio was formed by two founders that had been very successful with a company called Orthovita, a bone regeneration company that was sold to Stryker. When they exited Orthovita, they identified Aroa's technology as being the leading soft tissue regeneration technology. They licensed from us our hernia product, and we've co-developed that to commercialize both our hernia product and our breast product. Tela Bio is a NASDAQ listed company. They have no other technology apart from the Aroa Endoform, Aroa OviTex technology and products. They've raised over $150 million in US in order to commercialize these products. Predominantly call on the operating room, calling on general surgeons and plastic surgeons. In our own right, Aroa is also beginning to build out our direct sales in the US. So we have a direct sales team that we're in the process of building. We'll have 5 people by the end of this financial year, 15 by the end of next financial year, focused on the operating room, predominantly selling Myriad. Outside of the US, we are commercializing our products predominantly through local distributors. We have approvals in Europe, Southeast Asia, Middle East. So we're beginning to put those partnerships in place. So there's a large opportunity outside the US. Most of our resources are focused on building out a commercial operation in the US, but we are working with a number of other distributors in other parts of the world. Just in terms of manufacturing, so our manufacturing is well established. We've been manufacturing commercial devices for 7 or 8 years now. We've been in this facility where we are now for the last 6 years. Manufacturing has been scaled up. We have a very efficient and delicate process to ensure that we get a very high quality product out of our manufacturing process. It's very efficient, it's very low cost, it's very scalable. All of the scale-up work has been done so that for us now to increase our volume, it's really about adding more equipment into the facility. With our existing capacity at the moment, we have enough capacity for $30 million in sales. Over the next 12 months or so, we'll be investing another $3 to $5 million to take that scale or take that capacity to about $90 million in revenue. So just in terms of revenue, we've seen good growth in our revenue over the last 3 years, both on the Aroa side and on the Tela Bio side. When you look at the FY19, FY20 numbers, that doesn't look like a big step, but it's a little bit masked by the fact that we shipped Tela Bio large quantities of product for the commercial launch, and it masks that there's an underlying growth rate in those Tela products of in excess of 85%. From a margin perspective, margin continues to improve. We're at over 70% gross margin now, and as production volume goes up and as product mix changes, we expect to have significant improvements in margin over the coming years. Just quickly want to touch on COVID-19. So, you know, as a company predominantly selling in the US, we were impacted by COVID-19, particularly in April and May. So elective procedures stopped and outpatient wound centres closed. Since then, what we've seen is procedures track back, and you know, there's been a really good positive month-on-month trend. Hospitals now have public health measures in place, and they're able to operate in a way where there's a sustainable level of business. It's not completely back at 100%, and it'll be some time before it's back at that, but we've certainly seen, you know, a really nice trend over the last 6 months. From a 6-monthly perspective, we've met our 6-monthly forecast. It was a bit more positive than we expected, and certainly, you know, we're much more positive now about the second half of the year compared to where we were back at the time that we did the IPO or earlier in the year. So, you know, we're continuing to see improvements. We're continuing to see that track back, and, you know, we expect to put growth on over the coming 6 months. Just in terms of management team, you know, we've got a good broad base of management expertise with a lot of functional expertise in each of the areas, a team that has a lot of experience in the life science industry, and a team that's worked together for a number of years now. In terms of milestones and where we are now, so, you know, as a business, we believe we put in place a really strong platform in order to build a really substantial business. So, you know, we have manufacturing established, we have a number of regulatory approvals now, a number of products that are commercial in the US. You know, we have a sales team in the US and a good pipeline of products. So we really feel like we're at an inflection point to build a really successful medical device business. This year, we've delivered on a number of our milestones that we said that we would deliver post-listing. So we have the clearance from Symphony. Myriad powder will launch later in the year. We're building out our sales team. We also have recently had some studies come through from Myriad, and we will continue to have those coming through over the next couple of months, which you know, we expect to show really good outcomes. So I'm just going to pause there, Simon, and pass it back to you.
Awesome, thanks, Brian. First question is, are Aroa's procedures complementary or alternatives to PolyNovo and Avita therapies?
Yeah, good question. They're in the same general area. Typically, currently for both PolyNovo and Avita, they're really in the burn space, less so in the spaces that we're in. We don't tend to see them in the markets that we're operating in the US. Complementary is, you know, they may also be complementary. So, you know, Avita certainly complementary to the Endoform technology. PolyNovo probably used in slightly different use cases where they are being used for similar procedures. So, you know, I think the important thing is that these markets that we're operating in are quite broad, and there tends to be specific use cases in each of these areas where, you know, one product would be preferred over another. So I think there's certainly plenty of room for all of these technologies.
Right, and just in terms of Tela Bio, do they have any other brands or products that they push outside of Aroa?
Yeah, no. So all of Tela Bio's products are originated from Aroa. All of their manufacturing is done by Aroa. You know, co-development's done by us as well.
Great. And just in terms of competition, we briefly spoke about PolyNovo and Avita as alternatives. Where's the sort of biggest competition that you come across for your products?
I think in the market that we're operating, we're sort of competing against traditional products, and typically products that don't have the properties that the biologics bring. So, in the complex wound market, it's more traditional products, potentially synthetic wound dressings. In the implantable market, it can be either I'd say like first generation biologic products or synthetic products. So it's a bit of a mix depending on the market that we're in. Tend to be, our kind of impression is in some of these markets there hasn't been a lot of innovation for quite some time, so they are ripe for new products that bring new functionality with innovation that helps to, increase healing rates or decrease complications.
Do you see a direct link between new data and adoption in market, and what's the time frame?
Yeah, look, it's one important component. Certainly, data is important for surgeon confidence, and I think we've been well placed from a data perspective, particularly over the last 12 months with it's the data we have on the wound side, but then also the data that's coming through now on the hernia side. So I think increasingly the data that we've got is compelling, and that in addition to access to being on GPO contracts, to having a good field team and working with IDNs, there's a number of things that kind of come together there to drive adoption.
Great, thanks, Brian. Just a reminder for those on the webinar, if you did want to ask a question, just the Q&A box down the bottom. The next question: elective surgery in the first wave of COVID was put off. How do you see the response in next, hopefully not, potential future waves? What percentage of your sales are elective surgery? Yeah,
it's a good question. In terms of elective surgery now, it feels like it's back at a level that's much more sustainable. So I think when COVID came along, initially there was a lot of concern and elective surgery was pretty much stopped. They're now back at operating at some sustainable level, and I think, and they now have developed the ways to do that. So I think that's going to continue. Elective surgery is triaged, and so the more complex cases and the more important cases are dealt with sooner, and other cases continue to be postponed. With the markets that we operate in, it is elective surgery, but it's also typically tends to be the worst cases. And so, we're seeing that the cases that we're involved are continuing to happen, and I think that's a really good signal. It's certainly not back at 100%, but we're seeing a really nice trend there.
Right, and in terms of Symphony, it's your biggest addressable market. What are the sort of next steps in terms of commercializing it to some level of maturity?
Yeah, so Symphony is now with CMS, so we're seeking a reimbursement code for Symphony. We expect to have that in place by early next year. So it's in a process, and typically that process ends late December, January. And so next year we'll do a soft launch. We're running a clinical trial in the US next year. So that's going to be very key, and particularly for reimbursement and payers. So the full launch of that will be in 2022. We want to make sure that we come to market with really good data in the right population to really drive adoption of that product.
Right, and just the final question, in terms of the Bravo study, can you again talk to the significance of that and when investors should look for news or data coming out of that?
Yeah, so there will be another readout from that this quarter. We've had 20 patients complete that 24-month follow-up period. That's a really critical follow-up time, and so we have 50 patients that complete 24 months this quarter. So investors should look for that over the coming month or so, and that's that's a phenomenal result, and if that holds up, and we expect it to, then that's a really good signal, and I think it's going to drive a huge amount of confidence in the use of OviTex for these procedures.
So another question: have you considered licensing Myriad to Tela Bio and earning a 27% margin rather than building up a direct sales force?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, we certainly for Tela Bio, they have a lot of things on their plate in terms of their focus. There's not a complete overlap between where Myriad's used and where OviTex is used. So, they are quite different opportunities, but it also sets us up for our pipeline products as well. So at this stage, that's not something that we're considering.
Final question: your hernia product has been approved for a number of years now. When are you expecting sales to really ramp up?
Yeah, look, I think we feel like we've gone pretty quickly with commercializing that product. Typically, what you find with these sorts of procedures, the surgeons are very conservative, and they don't adopt a product without clinical data and then using it in their own hands. So we're now at a point where, with the clinical trial data that we've got, but also, Tela Bio has recently gained a contract with a very large GPO in the US, and we think that those two things are now coming together to really drive a significant uplift in volume. I mean, the other, I would couch that just with, obviously we're dealing with, as everyone is, there's a sort of COVID-19 sort of factor in there as well. So, that may or may not impact it.
Of course. Thanks very much, Brian. James, I'll just hand it back to you to provide some closing remarks before we finish up there.
Thank you, Simon. Well, look, it's been a real pleasure to present, and we're excited about the opportunity that Aroa presents for investors. We think it's a great opportunity, and it's certainly a medium to longer term opportunity to build a really significant regenerative medicine company, and we're really excited about that.
Great. It's been certainly been an exciting start to listed life, but still very early in the journey in terms of monetizing all of the different products. So a lot more to come. Looking forward to it.
Yep. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks very much, guys. Cheers.